the Japanese government generally estimated that it would take around 200 years to fully Japanize Nihonka, to fully toka, I think it's pronounced like the Tonghua, fully assimilate Koreans. However, things became more urgent in the end of the 1930s. Japanese at that point started to need Korean manpower, Korea's resources. But first and foremost, they needed Korean soldiers and labor to go, to fight, and to work with almost no wages for Japan. And in order to motivate Koreans to fight, kill, and die for Japan, and to work basically for free at the Japanese plants, they had to persuade Koreans that they are Japanese. You have to assimilate them. But the thing is, assimilation was very high on Japanese agenda from the end of the 1930s. But it's also striking to which degree this whole program just completely failed, completely fully. I mean, Koreans were forced to act as if they were Japanese, but nobody really believed in this, except a very small number of highly motivated ideological intellectuals who really wanted to become Japanese. There were such people, they were just very, very few.
오늘 강의는 블라디미르 교수님이 일제강점기 조선에서 한국인과 일본인의 혼인에 대해 말합니다. 일본이 무슨 생각으로 혼인을 바라봤는지, 또 그게 왜 뜻대로 되지 않았는지 말하는데요. 정책으로 밀어붙이고 제도로 묶어두려 해도 한국인들은 끝끝내 꺾이지 않았다는 사실입니다.
This is Professor Vladimir Tikhonov, also known as Pagnoja, who teaches at the University of Oslo in Norway. For not a few of you in the audience, Professor Tikhonov will require no introduction. Since he's a well-known author and commentator, born in Leningrad, Professor Tikhonov has, since his undergraduate days, been immersed in the study of Korea, and he received his PhD in ancient Korean history at Moscow State University in 1996. After some years of residence in Korea, he chose to naturalize as a citizen, and since the year 2000, he's taught and resided in Norway.
그럼 왜 그렇게까지 했을까요? 겉에서 이름 바꾸고 제도 손보는 걸로는 모자랐던 겁니다. 그것만으로는 끝끝내 안 바뀐다고 본 거죠. 그러니 아예 집안까지 손을 대기 시작한 겁니다. 그래서 혼인 이야기로 넘어가는 건데요. 이때부터 그냥 남녀 이야기가 아니라 조선을 바꾸려는 이야기로 보셔야 합니다.
It was illegal in a number of cases for a very long time, and anti-miscegenation laws were enforced not only by judiciary but also, especially in South, Deep South, by public opinion. I mean, dating white women could cost a black man life, literally in many cases, so to say. Just to give you an impression of how problematic such things are in a society stratified along both class, ethnic, and racial lines. Colonial Korea was one more such case. There is lots of research about what interracial intimacy meant for European colonies in Asia.
이어서 한국과 일본의 이야기로 넘어갑니다.
A realm of private relationship, you really felt that in most cases you are not very much welcome, so to say. So it really strikes to which degree the enormous amount of encounters, Japanese-Korean encounters during the colonial period, to which degree it's restricted to official rather than private sphere. But that is a society based on domination. That's how it often happens. It's interesting, however, that unlike Dutch in Indonesia, French in Vietnam, and British in India, Japanese, at least officially, were going to do one thing that Europeans didn't hope to do in Asia after the mid-19th century. Japanese were going to assimilate Koreans. Well, British didn't realistically hope to assimilate Indians. Dutch didn't want to assimilate the Indonesians, and there was no realistic hope to do so. In Japanese case, it was a little bit different. From the very beginning, there was the idea. It was predicated on the belief that Koreans and Japanese have common ancestors. Well, not necessarily everybody shared this belief. Some historians didn't, but it was understood that Korea is so much strategically important to Japan that it has to be kept in the Japanese hands perpetually. English and Dutch had the understanding that at some point they would move out of Asia. Japanese were not going to move out in Korea forever. Korea was to become completely, fully Japanese. The only point was that it was going to take long time.
그러니까 일본이 뭘 건드리려 했는지도 나오는 겁니다. 한국인들이 왜 끝끝내 안 바뀌는지 일본도 모르지 않았던 거죠. 같은 민족끼리 붙는 마음, 가족부터 챙기는 마음, 그게 생각보다 훨씬 크다고 본 겁니다. 그러니 겉만 손대선 안 되겠다. 아예 그 안으로 들어가 보자. 이렇게 간 거죠. 교수님이 사적인 자리 이야기를 길게 하는 이유도 바로 여기 있습니다.
So you had some cases of highly ideological people who did believe in this stuff. But the absolute majority of Koreans never believed that they are Japanese. So to say so, you had complete lack of real ambition towards assimilation on both sides of the ethno-racial divide. Assimilation was needed because Korea was needed for the Japanese war effort. But otherwise, it's just striking to which degree the whole program never worked. And it probably could not work when you have the people with long tradition of having their own statehood. You have extremely unequal society predicated on ethno-racial discrimination. You have clear power relationship. In such a case, you can't expect much of it.
결국 일본이 손댄 것도 여기였습니다. 한국인과 한국인 사이를 끊어놓으려면 그 사이로 들어가면 된다고 본 거죠. 그렇게 나온 게 한국인과 일본인의 혼인이었습니다. 겉으로는 혼인 장려, 그럴듯하게 보일 수 있습니다. 그런데 속은 딱 하나였죠. 한국인들을 일본에 더 묶어두려는 계산이었습니다.
But still, assimilation was the official policy. Mixed marriages, and now we're coming to our main topic. Mixed marriages were supposed to be a tool of such assimilation. Japan was the only colonizer which actually encouraged mixed marriages. Dutch never do it, French never do it, British never did it. So to say, Japanese did it. What is also even more interesting that from the very beginning, it was Japan's clear policy to encourage mixed marriages to a certain degree, even in the 1910s. So to say that it was estimated that assimilation would happen in some centuries. Still, mixed marriages were encouraged. The degree of encouragement was just going up all the time. And in the very end, in the 1939, the procedure of registering such marriages, it was called Naisenkekon, Nesonkyohon, Japanese-Korean intermarriage, was simplified. So to say, the number of cases was growing all the time. So by the beginning of the 1940s, you had more than 5,000 mixed couples residing only in Korea. But among the Zainichi Koreans, the Koreans living in Japan, there were around 2 million Koreans living in Japan by the end of the war. There were several tens of thousands of people who had Japanese spouse. So to say, in most cases, it was the marriage or civic union between Korean male and Japanese female. So to say. Well, what was the calculus here? Government general wanted to encourage such marriages, which understandably to assimilate Koreans and to increase their loyalty to the Japanese empire, for which they were going to die very soon. Many of them, anyway. On the Korean side, it was understood as one way to become more cultured, civilized. The Japanese females were seen as civilization agent both by government general and some Korean pro-Japanese intellectuals. And then it was also understood that once you become a part of Naitijin, well, how you should translate it into English, the metropolitan mother country people, once you become a part of Naitijin common, the family, then you probably would be less discriminated than it's otherwise the case. It was a way to escape discrimination, basically, by claiming that now you are Japanese since you married to a Japanese. So for Koreans, it was a way to become real imperial subjects, escape discrimination, gain a sort of status that would allow you to sort of pass as Japanese, for example, in China or other places conquered by the great Japanese empire. So to say, to get higher status. The symbol of the official encouragement for such marriages was the marriage between Prince Yongchin-wan, the fourth son of Korea's last real king, Kojong, and Nashimoto Mosako, a Japanese member of Japanese imperial family. So to say, that was symbolic.
그런데 여기서부터 말이 달라집니다. 겉으로는 좋은 말이 붙어 있는데 막상 안을 보면 전부 현실 이야기입니다. 하지만 그렇다고 해서 나라를 등진 선택까지 좋게 봐줄 수는 없습니다.
Well, Prince Yon ended up being a Japanese colonel in Japanese army. That he then returned to Korea after the liberation. That was yet another symbol, quite important on the Japanese side. Well, what was Japanese women from the viewpoint of Korean males? Those of you who went to school in South Korea in the 80s might remember this essay, Inyon. Inyon means karmic connection. Peach Honduk is the man who wrote it, known as Korea's best essayist ever. Anybody have read this essay? You had it in the textbooks. I don't know whether you have it now, but before that, it was on the textbooks. So it's about a Korean, educated Korean male who studied in Japan in the colonial period, made their beautiful literary girl Asako. At some point wanted to marry Asako, but it just never happened. In the end, after the war, the protagonist visits Japan once again and sees Asako being married to a Nikkei Ise Nikkei, a Japanese American who works as an officer with MacArthur's headquarters. So to say, what is interesting is that the protagonist was just appalled by this fact. The husband of Asako was neither American nor Japanese, but something in between. Protagonist suspected some opportunistic calculations in this. So to say, wow. It was sad. It was sad to see. It's an interesting attitude towards diasporic people. But anyway, so what is important here is the sort of attitude Korean male aspiring to Japanese female. Japanese female is seen as literate, educated, well-spoken, articulate, graceful, romantic. And once I marry her, highest degree of happiness, in a way. But at the same time, Japanese female is seen as very much out of touch for a subaltern intellectual. Such marriages are difficult to obtain. That wasn't very much understanding. The family would be against after all. It shows very well what interracial intimacy meant in colonial Korea. Many people aspired to this. It was, however, difficult because it would be stigmatized by Japanese settler population, but it would be also stigmatized by lots of Koreans in a way. And in the end, it's society based upon discrimination. So to say, to which degree it will work?
그러면 왜 자꾸 안 됐는지도 보이죠. 될 것처럼 말은 해놨는데 막상 사람 마음 앞에서는 계속 막히는 겁니다. 일본은 분명 계산을 세워놨는데 현실은 자꾸 다른 데서 어긋났던 거죠.
Well, we have another very interesting novel by Lee Kwang-soo. I just have mentioned him as Il Chin-hye scholarship receiver who studied in Japan. He studied in Japan for quite a long time. And a novel, Hyolso, Blood Letter, is based on his own, I think, personal experiences. That's another twist on the story. In this novel, you have a Japanese girl, Nobuko, Matsuda Nobuko, who actually wants to marry the Korean protagonist who says that he would never marry because he is married to a national cause, so to say. Then girl falls in love with him. He is so much moved by her love that he gradually becomes more interested in her, but in the end she dies so quickly that no real romance develops out of this. So what is interesting here is that we have exactly the opposite case. Japanese girl aspiring to Korean boy. But however, what is funny is how Lee Kwang-soo portrayed it. The case is portrayed as completely exceptional. Nobuko, for example, studies Korean and speaks some Korean with the protagonist. It's very well known. Absolute majority of Japanese settlers in Korea never spoke Korean. Very few people in Japan studied Korean in colonial time. So to say, completely improbable. Nabucco is painted as a very exceptional girl, very unusual girl. And her family wants to marry her away to Korea, just not to see how she behaves here at home, in a way. So it's a very exceptional case. And another interesting point here is that romance never really develops. The girl dies, so to say. Lee Kwang-soo was quite realistic about such things. In the society based on ethnic discrimination, such things may be interesting. I mean, it was challenging for him as a male. It was interesting. It never worked, so to say. Well, the thing is, this sort of skeptic attitude towards such interracial relationship is quite pronounced at the very beginning of colonial time Korean literature. One of the first well-known Korean writers, pre-colonial writers, is Lee In-jik. Himself studied in Japan for a very long time. Lee In-jik was a real pro-Japanese Korean. I mean, he believed that Koreans should be assimilated. He wrote several articles in Korean and Japanese on assimilation, and he was even appointed a director of Confucian school, Sangyung-wan, in Japan, wrote Korea with a huge fat salary. He really believed in the Japanese course. Interesting case. In fact, he was a translator for Lee Wan-yon when Lee Wan-yon signed the annexation treaty with Japanese. And he is also known as one of the founders of Korea's modern literature. But anyway, so to say, so you have a Korean very much on the side of the colonizers. And at the same time, in his novel, painting a sort of interracial family, Pinsonnane Il Mi-in. Pinsonnan is a poor Korean guy, literally. Pinsonnan. Il Mi-in is a Japanese beauty. Well, good contrast, isn't it? You have a portrait of dysfunctional family. A Japanese woman married a Korean student in the belief that he was going to make it big after returning to Korea. In reality, he was surrounded by strange types, sort of some swindlers, wannabes, and sort of all sort of good-for-nothings. The family was abjectly poor, and she felt herself very much alienated from everything going on around her. She speaks, of course, Japanese at home. Everybody did it in good society in colonial time, Keijo, Kyonson, Seoul today, so to say. But the marriage didn't work, and she spends most of her time complaining. So even the most pro-Japanese Korean intellectuals were very, very realistic when it came to the reality of interracial intimacy. It should be encouraged for the sake of imperializing Koreans, making him kominka, sarero, making him imperial subjects. It doesn't work in reality, however. so to say, it's from the very beginning. Well, you have lots of interesting novels dealing with this, and what is interesting is that even at the time when interracial intimacy becomes sort of very much emphasized part of the agenda during the wartime, as I have said, you need Koreans to kill and die. And even at that time, Korean literature is so skeptical towards the perspective of interracial intimacy, so skeptical.
그런데 여기서 봐야 할 건 따로 있습니다. 나라를 등진 친일 쪽 인물이 쓴 글인데도 막상 읽어보면 마음대로 포장이 안 됩니다. 될 것처럼 말은 해놨는데 정작 들어가 보면 자꾸 안 맞습니다. 그러니까 이건 친일파를 이해하자는 이야기가 아닙니다. 오히려 그렇게까지 나라를 등진 사람들조차 끝내 현실을 감추지 못했다는 이야기죠.
It's based on the name of very unfamous pro-Japanese association, late colonial time. So it's about a brother and sister, two Koreans who went to Japan to make it big. A brother enrolled to Japanese military academy. The surest way to become Japanese is to learn how to kill and die for the Japanese nation. And the sister entered into intimate relationship with a son of a Japanese businessman. Well, but in both cases, the romance with Japanese was extremely difficult. They were into romantic relationship with brother and sister from a prominent Japanese business family. But in the beginning, the male Korean protagonist was rejected, even although he was a Japanese army officer. He could command Japanese soldiers. By the way, it's interesting, in American army at the same time, no black officer would be allowed to command whites. A color line was much, much clearer in the United States. This army, Korean officer could command Japanese. It's an interesting comparison. But anyway, he could command Japanese soldiers, but he couldn't marry a Japanese girl from a good family. Well, what the interesting twist here is, when the war begins, the fortune of this business family declines because of the Todzai Keizai, the controlled economy. And after this, the Japanese sweetheart of the protagonist writes him a letter trying to patch the broken relationship and get him back. So the Japanese girl becomes available only after her family gets poor. Once you're poor Japanese, it's Korean guy is, sort of okay. If you're rich and prominent Japanese, no way. It's realistic. That's how things really looked like, even at the time when such romances were high on the agenda.
그렇게 깊숙이 파고들었지만 결국 사람 마음까지는 바꾸지 못했습니다. 한국인과 한국인 사이를 끊어놓으려 했지만 끝끝내 그 마음까지는 끊어내지 못했습니다. 오히려 그 틈으로 들어오려 했던 쪽이 한국 안으로 서서히 스며드는 일이 빈번했다 할 정도니 말입니다.
In this way, ideologically, he was fully committed to the cause of worldwide proletarian solidarity. However, that was the reality. Im Hwa and his wife. Im Hwa is a man of tragic fate. He was shot in North Korea in the 1953, accused of being American spy. Falsely, of course. So really tragic fate. I'm now wrapping up. So to say, the man who wrote most novels about interracial intimacy in the end of colonial period was, unsurprisingly, Lee Kwang-soo, whose blood letter we had already looked in. What is interesting, however, is most of those novels are actually written in Japanese. So to say, Lee Kwang-soo by that point was a crusader for the Korean-Japanese oneness, Ittai ilchye, Korean-Japanese being one and the same. And he was supposed to propagandize this idea. What was interesting is that he was too good a writer to simply write propagandistic pieces. his pieces are propagandistic, but at the same time they remain realistic. And as such, they paint what would really happen in case of interracial romance. So in one novel, for example, a Korean girl and a Japanese officer she loves are being united in a provisional marriage only before being executed by the Chinese nationalists on a front of the war against China. In yet another piece, you have a Korean student teaching a Japanese girl from a rich professorial family. They love each other. Professorial father would never accept it. The Korean girl is expelled from the family. He ends up being a prominent inventor honored by the emperor in Japan proper, and so on and so on. So you have lots of interesting twists and turns on the interracial romance theme. It never ends in anything resembling good sort of harmonious family. It just doesn't get there in a way. So, well, now it's a wrap up.
교수님은 오늘 강의에서 일본이 혼인을 어떻게 바라봤는지, 또 왜 일본은 결국 한국을 일본에 동화시키지 못했는지에 대해 당시의 모습들이 기록되어 있는 문학 작품을 통해 알아봤습니다. 하지만 끝까지 듣고 나면 다른 것도 보입니다. 일본은 조선을 바꾸려고 끝까지 밀어붙였고 한국인들의 가장 약한 마음을 파고들었습니다. 그 과정에서 나라를 등진 친일파들도 있었죠. 그들은 분명히 잘못된 선택을 한 사람들입니다. 하지만 그런 사람들이 있었다고 해서 우리 한국이 쉽게 꺾인 것은 아니었습니다. 한국인들은 같은 민족끼리 붙는 마음이 강했고 가족을 먼저 챙기는 마음, 일본인들이 한국인들 사이를 비집고 들어와도 끝끝내 끊어지지 않았습니다. 아무리 흔들어도 결국 꺾이지 않았던 겁니다. 우리 한국은 아주 오래전부터 이렇게 서로를 붙잡고 버텨온 민족이었으니 말이죠. 시청자 여러분들은 오늘 강의를 보며 어떤 생각이 드셨나요? 오늘 강의는 여기까지입니다. 시청해주셔서 정말 감사합니다.